report, Rhode Island has warmed more than 3 degrees over the past 100 years. Winter water temperatures in the bay have increased between 3 and 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Mean and extreme precipitation have increased during this century, with the highest number of extreme events occurring over the last decade. Sea level has risen more than 9 inches just since 1930 at Newport, faster than the global average. These are things that have already happened, and we're going to see this accelerate. So moving on to the policy landscape, on climate policy and the energy landscape, a couple of years ago, before I was working in this space, many of you in this room helped pass the Resilient Rhode Island Act. That statute sets emissions reductions targets. They're not binding targets, mind you, but they are targets nonetheless. A quick aside, there is legislation that CLF and Audubon have been working tirelessly on, the Global Warming Solutions Act, that would make those targets binding. And I understand maybe this is not the latest, but that the governor is not yet on board with the current version of that legislation.
That's right.
Thank you. So we know that science is calling on us to act more quickly than that, but in a way, I want to say, and I don't know if this will upset people in the room, but we can't spend our time arguing about the targets. We actually can't spend our time arguing about much at all. We need to implement. And so meeting the Resilient Rhode Island targets and reducing emissions means transitioning to renewable energy, period. That's what it means. That's what we have to do. And in a way, what has to happen is very simple. We know what we have to do. We have to shift heating. We have to shift transportation to electricity. You may have heard the mantra, electrify everything. The second thing we need to do is produce electricity with renewable systems. So we're increasing our electricity use and we're making that electricity cleaner. In another way, what has to happen is exceptionally difficult and complex. What is needed is nothing short of a complete mobilization to bring great disruption to the status quo. And that is, in fact, the point. The disruption is literally the point. The transformation of our energy system is also an opportunity to abide the principles of the Green New Deal, which, as you all know, is a plan to address the crisis with the type of urgency it deserves, and to decarbonize the economy in a way that is fair and just, unlike the way our economy operates now. So there are a number of things in place to reduce emissions in Rhode Island, a number of policies and goals that are related to our energy system, and I'm just going to tick through a couple of them so you have the basis. The first is the state energy plan. It's called Energy 2035, and it is very much a guiding document. Several years old now, and perhaps a little bit outdated on the thinking around natural gas and the need for natural gas as a bridge fuel. Second is energy efficiency, a key part of the state energy plan. And that has to do with the utilities energy efficiency plans, which are developed every year, and then on a 3-year cycle, a larger guidepost plan. My plug for energy efficiency is that the cleanest, cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that doesn't need to be produced. We should be investing everything we can in energy efficiency. Third, most everyone in this room, I think, knows about the governor's goal of 1,000 megawatts of clean energy by 2020. Sort of a subcategory underneath that are the number of programs, renewable energy programs, that allow for solar and wind development, including renewable energy growth, net metering, which compensates on-site solar generation, and virtual net metering, which allows remote generation for systems up to to 10 megawatts. Finally, Rhode Island is part of what's known as RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which puts a price on power plant pollution. Similarly, Rhode Island is part of a coalition of Northeast states that are working on a regional approach to addressing transportation emissions. which make up the largest share of our emissions and are a critical part of making progress in reducing greenhouse gases. So how are we doing on all of those fronts? We're both doing well, we're doing really well, and we're doing not so well, depending on what measure you're looking at. We are, in fact, one of the leaders on energy efficiency. We are also well on our way to the 1,000 megawatt goal. The last I saw at the end of last year, we were up to about 363 megawatts. That does not include a 400 megawatt offshore wind farm, which was just approved by the PUC, which is really good news. One important thing to note about the 1,000 megawatts. That is not the finish line. We don't stop when we get there. And solar is a critical part of reaching not just the 1,000 megawatts, but our overall carbon reduction goals, and to giving people more control over their energy use and their energy decisions. All of which is to say, we have to be smarter at siting solar. We have to figure out how to best site solar to balance the need for renewable sources, and indeed accelerating renewable sources, and the protection of sensitive environmental areas that we all work to protect. So working on the solar siting issue over the past 22 months, there was a stakeholder group consisting of many folks who are in this room. It was a very diverse group of folks, municipal planners, farm interests, clean energy developers, clean energy advocates like myself, land trusts, consumer advocates, state agencies, conservation groups. We all had to figure out the answers to a couple of key fundamental questions. Where is solar going from a land use perspective? Where is it being sited? What are the programs and policies that are driving it to the places that it's being sited? How much solar do we need and want? What is our goal for deploying solar in Rhode Island? How much can we put on rooftops and landfills and preferred spaces? How can we minimize the impact on environmental areas while also considering costs? All of those questions can't be asked in a vacuum, and it's important to remember that everything has a cost. Every choice has a cost. So we set out to answer some of those questions. I don't think we completed all of that work. But solar projects are developed under the various programs that I mentioned a few minutes ago. If we know anything about economics, we know that larger projects have economies of scale, which makes rooftop solar more expensive than ground mount projects. A quick note on some of the specific pricing issues of the Renewable Energy Growth Program and virtual net metering. REG, as a program, allows for different prices based on different types of projects and different sizes of projects. So large ground mount systems are priced differently than small rooftop systems. For virtual net metering projects, the pricing is the same no matter where the projects are located. This, of course, incentivizes projects where the land is cheapest, and that often means flat, forested parcels. On the size front, a challenge is the following. Although there's a 10 megawatt cap on the size of virtual net meter projects, there is a loophole, and developers can site projects on contiguous parcels, allowing for projects of much greater size. So 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 30. Other challenges have to do with the electric distribution system and its capacity to take on more distributed generation. Managing solar at the local level is subject to local politics and needs that town may have for revenue. Rhode Island has yet to put in place a plan for where to site renewable energy. All of the issues that I've been talking about has not yet taken into consideration siting, or until recently has not done so. Finally, Rhode Island doesn't have a plan or strategy for protecting critical habitat areas, and by that I mean areas that are not already protected and may be currently privately owned. So this legislative session, the stakeholder group worked on a consensus-driven bill, worked in good faith to balance solar deployment with natural resource protection. 2 bills were introduced, one in the House by Chair Bennett, one in the Senate by Chair Sosnowski. As introduced, the 2 bills were not identical, but each of them included a version of several strategies that stakeholders believed would begin to address at least the economics of siting. So the key parts of that legislation are first to require municipalities to implement comprehensive solar siting ordinances by next spring, so April 2020, with technical assistance offered by OER as needed. The second is the creation of a special incentive that would reimburse a portion of developers' interconnection cost for projects that are sited in preferred siting locations like landfills, gravel pits, previously developed areas. The third is to reduce system sizes, or actually eliminate the loophole that allowed projects of 10 plus 10 plus 10 equals 30. So the true cap would be a 10 megawatt on projects in residentially zoned areas. And the fourth would give special size consideration to more sensitive environmental areas, areas of environmental concern, where the bill had a limit of 4 megawatts in those areas. The bad news is the Senate version of this bill, the sub-A, was significantly pared back and includes only the municipal ordinance section of the bill. That's the version that has passed out of the Environment Committee. And if I were a betting person, which I'm not, I would expect that if something moves forward, it would be that version of the bill. The good news is, I'm not entirely sure what the good news is. The session is not over. The prospect of another year without substantive changes to the economics of siting, I think many folks in this room agree that that's disappointing. Stakeholders have spent literally hundreds of hours developing what we believe to be reasonable solutions and some reasonable siting strategies. I will note that no one was 100% satisfied, and that probably means we did a pretty good job. So my takeaways, I do have a couple of takeaways. Regardless of what happens with the legislation, the work that the stakeholders have done to date is extremely important. Many stakeholders listened conscientiously to others who came from various and diverse perspectives. And a number of developers have stepped up as allies in attempting to address siting. The stakeholder group came up with a bill that had the support of the majority of environmental groups, clean energy groups, municipal planners, the League of Cities and Towns, again, developers, not all developers. The majority of the environmental community has been much closer together on this issue than has been suggested. I do think the state has a role and a responsibility to incorporate siting into its renewable energy programs, just as I believe municipalities have a role and a responsibility to develop siting ordinances that thoughtfully address this relatively new land use. I had hoped I would be able to report at this annual meeting that the effort to move ahead with this legislation would be on track. Again, the session's not over yet. We may not get there this year, but I do hope that we're eventually able to be a leader in New England in this space. And with that, I look forward to hearing from Tom on the municipal perspective and the challenge of siting in his town. Thank you so much.